Welcome to Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories. I'm your host, Allison Preisinger-Heggins. Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories is a podcast exploring society, culture, and current events through conversation. We aspire to create an open, respectful, and equitable space where guests may feel free to share their truth and lived experiences. Our core values are rooted in community, connection, and personal development. Stories help us learn, relate, and grow. We are here to listen, to take notice. Thank you for being with us. I would like to acknowledge the land on which this episode was created. I would like to show gratitude to the traditional ancestral land of the Shoalwater Bay and Chinook tribes, recognizing that these names are not the original names of the people of these areas. Land acknowledgement statements are an important part of honoring those whose land we now live and work on. We begin each episode this way to help spark ideas and keep these conversations in the front of our minds so that we may continue to be open to doing better. I encourage listeners to research the land on which you live and are listening right now. Recognizing this is just the beginning. And some additional next steps to consider: seek out the stories of Native people from our shared history and today. Maybe spend some time asking yourself difficult questions and challenging norms that may be linked to colonialism. Engage in your community around topics like land tax, curriculum, hiring practices, decision-making, organizing, and reparations. Seek out media created by Native people. The more you explore, challenge, and learn, the more questions may arise, but this is how we grow and connect. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories. My guest for this episode is originally from Atlanta, Georgia, and moved to Seattle in 2017. Sarneshea Evans loves many things, including good food, good music, and even greater company. She spends most of her time connecting people to parks and public spaces and co-creating spaces that are welcoming and inclusive. We met this past summer while working for the same organization building community space along Seattle's waterfront. Sarneshea is a graduate of Howard University and holds a master's degree in urban environmental education. Thank you for being with us, and please enjoy my conversation with Sarneshea Evans. Well, all right. It's the afternoon. Good afternoon, Sarneshea. It's good to see your face. I feel like we've only seen each other's faces through this other than like a handful of times, through video, I mean, by this, other than a handful of times on the pier in Seattle. So how are you today?
I'm doing really good. I'm glad you said it was afternoon. I was like, yes, it's morning, afternoon. What time is it? What day is it? I'm doing really well. I just had to remind myself today was Friday, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, because they all blur together. You're like, all right, what day again? Because you're working mostly remote still, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Have you done that job transition? Because you're transitioning jobs soon, but has that happened?
It has actually started. I started the 1st of October, my new position, new role at the Trust for Public Land, and I'm still hanging on a bit at Friends of Waterfront Seattle, mostly supporting some of the weekend events and concerts.
Nice. Okay. So you're there for the Saturdays for this month.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Well, for those who are listening to us and don't know, we met this year through Friends of Waterfront Seattle. I came on as a contractor to work the events as a production coordinator, and Sarneshea, your role was in community engagement, correct? Is your role similar in your new job, or?
It's somewhat similar. There's some overlaps, but my role and responsibilities have shifted to more strategy and strategic thinking, planning to increase the number of green spaces, parks that community members have access to. And a lot of that includes thinking down the line about funding opportunities and having conversations with donors, thinking about grants, building partnerships. And at some point, we want to get around the policy. So really being able to make some long-term changes that will support community members as opposed to just being for our own purposes as an organization.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And is that mostly in King County, or is it serving other areas as well?
It is Washington State. We're working in the Northwest region. So that is essentially Washington and Oregon, but most of my work will be in Washington State. with a focus on South King County right now and areas of Pierce County.
Oh, very cool. Awesome. This sounds like is it a fairly large organization then to cover all that space?
It's a national organization. So I would say
Oh,
overall,
okay.
there are quite a few team members, but in this region, I believe we have about 15 folks. So kind of small team for
Yeah.
two states
Okay.
plus.
Nice. So kind of concentrated work. That's really great. That's exciting. I imagine you're excited to make that transition and have it be like sounds like a broader reach for folks. It's really great. It's cool. Well, so we chatted about this a little bit, I think, when we got to see each other on the pier on the waterfront. You did not grow up in Washington, but where did you grow up?
So I'm originally from, and I always make this joke, it's a terrible joke, but I grew up in the greatest state in the Union, Georgia. And people are like, well, Georgia, how dare you? But I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia.
Fully, like you grew up there, your formative years was
Yeah.
all Atlanta?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
In the same neighborhood for the most part, just solely being in the South.
Then you are wearing a Howard University hat right now because I can see you. Folks won't be able to see you later, but did you go to Howard then?
Yeah, after having enough of Atlanta, I moved to DC, attended Howard University, which is a historically Black university, and loved it. Loved being in DC, loved being at a university that was, for me, kind of in the middle of it all. And there were some folks who had internships with the federal government, a lot of nonprofits, their headquarters or their base office is in DC. For me, I really loved it. Like you're so close to it all. If you want to pop down to Virginia, it won't take very long. Up to Maryland, Baltimore, even West Virginia was maybe an hour and a half away. So really being in the sweet spot if you want to go out and explore nature and really feel like you're in the middle of it all. You're not too far away if you want to be in the heart of like all the tourists who come to visit. You could do that. If you just wanted your peace and relaxation at home, you could do that. And so there was just a bit of everything.
Mm-hmm. That sounds great. I don't think I have not been to DC, the DC area, other than the train station. So that doesn't really count. So,
I mean, it does a little bit. To me, like transit centers, train stations have a bit of the personality of the city. And so it might
that's
just
true.
be a splash of it. But yes.
Yeah. That sounds great. So you were there straight after Atlanta. So going back to Atlanta, who were you surrounded by growing up?
I would just say mostly family. So my mom, my grandma, and quite a few cousins, uncles, and aunts. And it's not funny, but it kind of is. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother and other retirees. And I know that at least in our office, there was this running joke, and even in my personal life, that I'm just an old lady. Because being so young and being surrounded by elders, I picked up on their personalities, their personas, just some of their like humor from like the 1930s and 40s. And so being a little kid with the mentality, personality of an older person has been confusing and jarring for a lot of folks. They're like, why are you, how is this working? And then when I'm especially around folks closer to my age who are like younger or just like anyone who's under 50, they're just like, how are you like this? And everyone who's like 50 plus is like, my kind of humor, my girl. And it's like, yes, sweet spot.
Yep. There you go. Nice. Well, I do remember being on the hot days, being on the pier with you, and you would always check in with everybody about if they're drinking enough water, if they're hydrated. So,
yeah, I would say just early on that was just a really huge component of how I was socialized. Like, you ask the questions, you care about people, and it's very much, did you eat today? Like, have you had something to drink? Are you comfortable? Do you need shade? And just really a combination of that Southern hospitality mixed with just the way elders navigate the space. Of like, they've gone through a lot of things, they've had the experience, and so they're really in the mode to cater to and provide for others. And that has really been a part of just how I navigate.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Did you have siblings growing up too? It sounds like maybe you were just an only child.
I'm the oldest and the youngest. The only.
Okay.
Yes.
Nice.
So that was,
awesome.
Didn't love it. And I think I was quite vocal about it. I was like, hey, I want a sibling here somewhere. I don't know how that works, but I need someone to make it happen. And everyone's like, No. One,
Wasn't in the cards.
yeah.
Yeah.
My mom's like, one is more than enough. And like being an adult, I'm like, I see it. I completely agree. And so in those spaces, I would just hang out with cousins and
Hmm.
kind of have my feel of what it's like to be a sibling. I was like, this is a lot. And then I'll go back home, like, no, I take it all back. I'm fine. And then it's just like the
Yeah.
rotation continues. Like, actually, they're having a great time. I want that dynamic at home too. And just
Right.
kind of continuing until I got to a point where it's like, no, I understand how this works.
Just acceptance and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But growing up, you got to navigate that. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cousins are a big part of growing up for me too. So they're kind of like extra siblings. I just have the one brother, but yeah, extra siblings. So that definitely counts because you
Yeah.
learn a lot from them. You share memories. You can complain about the older people in your family with them,
Oh
and
my
we all get
gosh.
it.
Exactly. Exactly. I would say, yeah, the
Yeah.
only the thing that stands out to me about being the only child is like being in school and people, if you have older siblings, just like anything happens, they'll come to my school afterwards, or they'll come to my class and protect me, or vice versa.
Mm,
For me, it's like, oh, I'm out here by myself, so I can't like initiate any fights. I can't be on the wrong side of a conversation, because if
mhm.
things go left for me, it's like I'm my own sibling. I am my own squad, and being
Right?
able to
That's
navigate
true.
that. And I
Yeah.
think that it worked out well for me and never really had any conflict or issues. But I just
Mhm.
always thought about that for the folks who were either in tussles or in conflict. They were always like, if you hit me, my sibling and my brother or my older cousin who's in school with me will show up. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not the
Yeah.
case for me. This could go terribly wrong.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So you weren't in the same school district as any of your cousins, huh?
Oh no, they were about
Yeah.
an hour away, an hour drive
Okay.
away, so a completely different county.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So you couldn't fall back on them for that then.
I mean, if I did, it's like I have to send a message,
Right.
send a pigeon earlier in the morning. It's like, I'm giving you ample time to make it here.
Yep, totally. Hop the bus, get on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did your mom do when you were growing up?
She That's an excellent question. She, for the most of what I can remember, has either been in a combination of like hospitality world and or more so customer service. So when I was of age to remember, she was working for the airlines and just doing a lot with cargo and processing the shipments from either across the U.S. or internationally. And when I was younger, I thought that was the coolest thing. So when she was focused on international cargo shipments, it's actually shocking the number of things that get sent just like across the world.
Mm.
So there were times where they would get a shipment of live animals, so chicks or bunnies. Sometimes they would get larger animals like chimpanzees, tigers,
Huh.
if they were either being shipped from either one zoo to another, or if they were kind of being shipped to like be treated for it. It's like, who knows
Oh.
exactly why, but like sometimes the circus will move around and they're like shipping certain
Mm.
animals. It
Wow.
was super bizarre because she's like, "Oh, look, we saw a tiger." I was like, "A tiger at
What?
work?" Like, you saw a box of chicks? What? And then I think it was fun too because if there were different artists performing in Atlanta and they had a massive concert, they would ship like all their merch across the country or from one
Sure.
location to the next. Some of the clothing that we wear that show up in the stores came from like their original destination. And so I think that was an incredible job because it puts a lot of things in context in terms
Mhm.
of how things are made, where they're made, who makes them, how they get to our stores, how we're purchasing them. Some of the food, because folks are shipping seafood. I mean, especially because Atlanta's landlocked, so to get fresh
Oh, sure, yeah.
seafood, you're either going to ship it or you're going to drive it a couple of hours. And so, just even some of the foods that we eat and how they're being transported and what that packaging looks like, what the process is, that was just I was exposed to that early on, knowing that there was just like a lot of other context missing. But for me, it was great. And I think this was around the time my mom, like early on when cell phones were really coming out. And so I would see the blurry, super pixelated picture, like, oh, look at it. In
Yeah.
retrospect, like if I try to look at that, I'm like, can't tell you what's there. It's just like a bunch of grayish, blackish squares put together.
Right, a bunch of pixels.
Yes, just pixels. At best, you're like, oh, those are pixels. At work, you're like, what? Is this lint? Did someone take a picture of
Yeah.
lint? Like,
You took a picture in your pocket, didn't you?
that's exactly what it will probably look like now.
That's funny. Yeah, that's true. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, it kind of took the mystery out of a lot of different industries, it sounds like the concert industry, the zoo industry. I suppose that's an industry, right?
I think
Yeah,
probably less now, but early
true.
on,
Yeah,
being really
that's
big.
interesting. Is she still doing that now, or is she
She
retired? Or
retired last year,
oh, exciting! Nice.
during COVID, and I don't think
Yeah.
that that's what she wanted to do. But
Oh, okay.
after she was, everything was said and done, and she was able to stay at home, she's like, "Why didn't I do this sooner?" I'm like, "I." Excellent question, but
Yep. Yep.
she's happily retired and making the most of it.
That's good. Still in Atlanta.
Yes.
Nice. When you were growing up, and your grandma was around, was she working or was she retired by then too? Or did she work before?
She was retired, but there was a moment where because my grandma and I are very similar in that we get restless after a while. So she was like, "Yeah, I'm retired. It's going to be great." And then not too long after that, she's like, "Yeah, I'm going back to work." And I guess you could say worked, but kind of worked part time at our church doing some of the bookkeeping. And so that was a huge just chunk of our lives because there were times I would just kind of go with her and watch from the sidelines, like, okay, that's a $20 bill. Okay. And just like learning to
Yeah.
do math by like watching folks count
Yeah.
money and just keep like documentation. And she did that. And at some other point, and to say this out loud now, I have to think about it a little more, but there was a moment she worked at a retirement home as a
Mm-hmm.
retiree. And at the time, it didn't dawn on me because some of the folks who lived in the retirement home were like much older than she was. And my brain didn't associate they're not too far off in terms of age, but she was a lot more mobile and was still like very quick on her feet. And some of the residents were just much older, or they had lived very different lives and were moving much slower, needed more support than she did. And at the
Mm.
time, I'm just like, why would she work here? And then as an adult, I'm like, wow, why would you work here? These are your people. But she did that for a
Yeah.
while, and she really actually enjoyed it. I think that she stopped after a while because I think it took a toll on her emotionally because there were
Mm.
times she would respond or go check on residents, and some of them had unfortunately passed away. And
Mm.
so I think after seeing that a couple of times and then having to notify family and work it, just coming through that space and knowing that she wasn't significantly younger than some of those folks was, I
Right.
know, a challenge for her. And so she stopped doing that. And then I think she taught like a computer class at some point.
Oh,
And
yeah.
this was
Nice.
early on when computers were more accessible and like
Mhm.
right as the internet was just made available to more folks. And she's actually the person who taught me how to use a computer.
Oh, very cool. That's great. Yeah, I imagine that work in a retirement home or something like that would be difficult especially if you hadn't had that your whole life, being a nurse or being a CNA or something for years and years, but then just kind
Mhm.
of launching into it and seeing some of that, but also being closer to that age. Sure. Yeah, that would be hard.
She loved interacting with the residents' families, and they would
Mm.
even plan some family days. Because I loosely remember an experience where there was a pony
Oh,
involved, and so some other
nice.
kids were there, and they were doing a lot to just make it so that family members would come see their parents, see their older relatives, and it feel more like a family gathering on a consistent basis. So that she really enjoyed. I think they planned like movie nights, so that she really enjoyed the social aspect of it. But it was
Mhm.
really some of the realities just around health and just death that I'm sure just really was not for her.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. Sounds like a nice community, though,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to do all those activities. That sounds really great.
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool, though, that you have that memory with your grandma that she got to show you all those things.
Mm-hmm.
That's really great. I was just being made fun of by my parents separately for how fast I type.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember there was this I don't remember what it was called, but there's this typing game that my grandma had on their computer when I was little that I would, practice on. And I attribute my fast typing to that. So I was just reminded of that this weekend. So,
Oh, yeah. My
yeah.
grandma I think it was called like Mavis Bacon.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was a typing program, and my grandma tried to get me into it, and I was like, "This is just moving entirely too fast for my little fingers." And to this day, like
Yeah.
my typing is average because of
Really.
that. I just like I refuse. Like, why would I ever need to type fast? Here
Yep.
we
Yep.
are.
Yeah.
Here we are, decades later. Like, that was a skill.
Constantly on the computer. Yep. I know.
Had no idea.
I think I must have thought of it as this cool game or something and not like some boring thing. I don't know. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
little game, but that's just me and my weirdness, but
But it has served you well. The rest of us are
it's,
like,
if nothing else, I've got that. Yeah.
just like typing. It's like that's what paper and pen is for.
Yeah, true.
And here
Yeah,
we are.
at
It's
that
like,
time.
where
Yeah.
do you buy pens from?
Yep. Who needs those things?
Right.
True, true. Did you go straight to Howard right after high school?
Yes.
And then what was your degree? What'd your degree end up being there?
So I majored in anthropology and minored in classical civilizations
Mm.
because I went in. Well, I was interested in anthropology because of National Geographic Channel, and there was a series called Taboo that really focus on taboos. There's things that are just outliers in different communities and different cultures across the world, and a lot of the experts that weighed in were anthropologists. I'm like, that I want to do that. I
Mm-hmm.
want to be able to travel to some of those places and like really be in a place to like watch people live their lives and talk about it or write a report about it or be able to just really end up on a show like this to report back. And that was part of my motivation. And then there was a moment I was like, yeah, I want to be an archaeologist because that was part of the coursework. And like, this would be incredible, like to have discovery and, your name would be in all these academic journals and the notoriety be there, but just like the level of accomplishment to say, I found something that had been hidden from the rest of the world for who knows, hundreds of years,
Mm-hmm.
centuries, a millennia, whatever that might be. Really excited about it. And part of the reason I picked my minor being classical civilization is just understanding some more of that world as it relates to ancient Rome, Greece, and even parts of what then was Mesopotamia and then Egypt. So that loved it, like absolutely loved it. And then I discovered what the pay process is like for archaeologists, and then I opted out. I opted out because the work is fun. Well, it's fun to a degree, but it's also grueling because depending on where you are, you're out in the elements, and there's no guarantee that you will find anything. And a lot of it's based on funding. And so, if you have funding for 2 years and you don't find anything, that's really it. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of it is there's a lot of uncertainty. And I was being, I don't know, 17, 18, I was like, yeah, I'm not for that level of uncertainty. Like, if I don't find
Right.
anything,
Yeah.
great. But if I can't get paid afterwards, no, 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 no.
Yeah. That's a deal breaker. Did you kind of figure that out and find that out in the process of getting your degree or more afterwards?
It was really the tail end of the degree of
Yeah. Yeah.
like really being in a place to do some exploration in terms of just like careers and job opportunities and just hearing more and more. I'm like, oh no, this is not it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just reflecting because I had advisors and instructors in our department who were and I love that about our department is everyone was so laid back, but sometimes they were so laid back that it was scary. So in other departments, they're like, hey, biology, we need to get you all together. Like, are you doing pre-med? Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You need a path. Like, figure it
Right.
out. The anthropologist is like, so glad you all are graduating. And we're like, we're like, what advice can you give us? Like, what direction should we take? It's like, oh, you'll figure it out. Yeah, just take some time to
Mm.
hang out. I'm like, hang out? And it's just everyone is like in this panic mode. She's like, like my life is about to change drastically. What do I do?
Right.
And they're like, yeah, just like enjoy yourself. Like, get a certificate if you want. You might want a master's and you just do whatever. And I was like, huh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it was tail end of my last year. And then once I graduated, I was a part of a summer program that was tailored to archeology in an urban area. And so it was called the Urban Archaeology Corps. And it was a group of just like young folks ranging from some high school students to college students to some recent graduates. And we were working with a local nonprofit in the DC area, the National Park Service, to learn more about archaeology as a field, and then more specifically as a field in national parks in kind of urban centers. And we were able to do some light surveying and use some techniques in some of the national parks, more specifically Fort DuPont being the park. And a part of that program, we also did some research on the site, and for the few items we found, none of them like really of significance, but being able to at least tell a story of usage of the park. So finding a lot
Oh.
of bottles and bottle shards and just like different elements of a bottle that are from a different decade. So even kind of being able to kind of track usage and where people were really gathering, what they were doing. And so there were still some stories being told even in some of the artifacts found in some of the shallow areas, and pieces in the shallow area. But Fort DuPont was one of several. I'm trying to remember all the details. It's one of several civil. It's one of several Civil War forts, earth forts that were created. And there's actually in the DC area there was several forts created, and it creates like a circle around the city, and it was all created to defend the city against the Confederate army. And what was really interesting, a lot of the research that came up about those forts, in particular Fort DuPont, was that a lot of enslaved folks from Confederate states fled to the DC area, more specifically those forts, to seek the protection of Union soldiers from just overall slavery, but more so their slave owners. And that really was just like an aha moment for me and a lot of us to just really think about, one, the movement of folks, and two, just kind of the role of an army at that point in time to, I mean, protect people and amongst other things, just really navigating war all on its own. And a lot of those folks who were enslaved and then were in those forts, they essentially became the community members who their descendants now live in those neighborhoods, and being able to
Oh.
see the progression of their movement from different southern states, more so from South and North Carolina, and then some in the Virginia area. But yeah, just knowing that folks' relatives, their ancestors, their family members moved because of slavery, and a lot of folks in the DC area, particularly living in close proximity to that fort, have been there for generations.
Mm.
And yeah, we just did a lot to better understand the history of that space and uncover what we could to just better support the narrative that was already there. And I would say after that, once the African American Black community was more so established in that area, there were still a lot of disparities in that just the resources weren't there to support folks. And I appreciate the community members. They very much were like, well, we'll figure it out on our own. And a lot of the homes in that neighborhood were built by community members, and they would come together and have the resources. And a lot of the homes, again, like everything was kind of done within the community. And then there was a want later on to just really put that neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhoods essentially on the grid, because they didn't have necessarily the same kind of access to water, to light, to just baseline infrastructure. And part of even incorporating them into the larger city was just full of discrimination, in that some of the home, like there was a moment where you had to have a permit or you had to show that you had a license to build a home. And for folks who were like, I'm
Mm.
just good with my hands, I can figure it out, they weren't in a place to continue in that same role. And so we've often had the conversation around segregation, and it's like, it's terrible, and that shouldn't be how anyone grows up or how anyone has to navigate a space. And the challenge with integration is it means that just the way that certain systems operate are now applied to the people who have been previously segregated. So schooling looks differently, and a lot of the students that live in the neighborhood were bused out of their communities. And so that sense of community and that collectiveness wasn't there anymore because they're going to schools all over, as opposed to let's go to the school in walking distance because it has the same kind of resources. And if anything happens, my neighbor can come pick me up or my parents are nearby, as opposed to the resources being elsewhere. And so that was just a huge part of that project. And that really shifted what I wanted to do. I was like, archaeology is cool, but like being in a space to tell stories about folks, hear stories about folks, and then the nexus with public spaces became more important to me.
Wow, yeah, so many questions among all that information. Because I think when I think archaeology, I just from my very limited experience and knowledge of it, I always think like super, super, super far back. So to hear that you were able to discover, maybe not discover is not the right word, but follow a story from not so far back, just the Civil War, which I mean, it's all relative, I guess, but not that far to now and how it's affected, permitting and the whole system that's in place now, that development through the years. That sounds like a really cool program to have been a part of straight out of college. And for the project, what kind of was the process? Because as I'm picturing like the old stuff that I would see probably in National Geographic stuff of like taking a spot of land, gridding it out, and like doing the digging or the things like that. But that's may not have been the process that you do in the more urban areas. I don't know, but
I mean,
what was that
that
process?
is pretty much it.
Is it
There's a
okay?
lot. There are a lot of things that happen on the back end that I wasn't necessarily privy to, but even like the whole
Mm.
conversation with the landowner, but in this instance being the Park Service, so getting those permissions
Oh yeah.
elsewhere
Okay.
and them being able to say, all right, here's the exact area that we would like you to work in. And then from there, doing some grading, all depending on where you are. Some folks will use metal detectors, but from that grading, just like surprising, a shocking level of measurement just to ensure that there's a consistent process in the areas that are being looked at. And from there, sifting through some of the sediment, some of the ground and earth to just see what is there. But I would say the thing that I really learned the most was really the process. Like it is not just like, all right, we're gonna dig here and mark an X on the ground and just keep it going. There's
Hmm.
a lot more strategy and a lot more attention to detail that is there that makes it so that one that you have that consistency to know like on this day and time this is where we were digging, this is what we
Right.
uncovered. So that process is there, but also making sure that you can come back to it later and have a clear sense of where you left off and what should be part of the process next, or what area should be the focus afterwards. And even a part of that program, we went to like the Library of Congress to do research, and also going to, so the National Park Service has essentially an archive, an archival building where museum, it's actually called the Museum Resource Center, where just any artifacts are there. And so even learning the process of cataloging, how things are stored, how they're stored properly, how you would bring them out of storage to examine them, just really looking at the process from beginning to end, so that of some of the items, I believe some of the items we found live as a part of that larger catalog.
Oh, very cool. I wouldn't have even thought about that, but that makes complete sense, and it's really cool the stories that come out of that research. Did you say earth forts? Is that what you mentioned? So
Yes.
like they made them kind of blend into the landscape, or is
It
that what it was?
is,
Or
for the most part, I made the comparison from like other, like Fort McHenry in Baltimore, for instance. It is like it's going to be there for a while just because they use, uh, I believe, concrete, but they
oh,
use
okay.
concrete or just like other materials to physically create a fort. And so it has a lot more longevity versus the forts in the DC area were made out of like wood and dirt.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
And so over time is very difficult to see them because vegetation has grown, trees have grown over it, around it. Any level of rain and erosion, it makes it so that it's basically impossible to recognize unless you know what you're looking for. And there are
Hmm.
different areas. So there may be an area where it's like, why is there a weird little hill here? Or why is there a divot or what looks to be like a ravine running through an area? So it's really hard to notice if folks aren't really clear what was there before or what to look for.
And so that led you to wanting to do work in more public spaces. What kind of came next after that? Was it the Seattle area, or was it? Did you stick around DC for a while longer?
I
Or
stayed in DC for maybe another 3 or 4 years. And so after that program, I started to work for the organization, the nonprofit that was a part of the project called Groundwork Anacostia River DC. And the organization is a part of a national, essentially, network of other trusts or other quote unquote chapters. And each one, they're in cities like Yonkers, New Orleans, Richmond, Virginia, and I also believe Richmond, California, Milwaukee, Denver, Portland. So there are quite
Mm.
a few trusts, and over the years they will add more trusts to the national, I guess, count of organizations under the larger umbrella of Groundwork USA. And I love that. The one thing I love was that each trust had a different focus and it was very localized. So there were some trusts that might focus on water access, other might be focusing on food security through farmers markets, others might focus just on green spaces. The focus really looked different based on each city and the needs of those cities. And I want to really empower young people to fit into those roles, to be the folks to think about, generate those solutions, knowing that a lot of the challenges that we're experiencing, we're leaving it up to them, unfortunately. And so putting them in a space to really take on those leadership roles early on, so that by the time they're older, they're well aware of what's happening and are in a better place to just be the advocates that I'm sure their parents and just older relatives and other folks in their communities wish they had the ability, access, and resources to be. And with this organization in the DC area, the focus was on restoring the Anacostia River, and the Anacostia River feeds into the Potomac in Virginia. But Anacostia is one of the most polluted riverways, especially in the DC area, Mid Atlantic area. And the executive director at the time grew up with the river and almost in his backyard. His house was walking distance, and he remembers growing up and being able to go swimming in the river, and that's what you did. It's like there was no need
Mm.
for a pool. That's that's just like where you would go and you would hang out, and just like for him being able to reminisce over some great experience that he had and how transformative his time with and around the river was. And now him being a grandparent at this point in time, and his grandchildren don't have the same kind of access or ability to be in the river, knowing that it had become polluted. And part of the work of the organization was to work with young people to really talk through environmental education and some environmental justice, to just make it a point so they're aware of what's going on and are in a better place to, one, be informed, to two, then make their own decisions, and three, become advocates and empower other young folks and their community members to be a part of the work. And so there were after we worked in some high schools, and I provided classes after school, organized field trips, and some recreational activities to get the young folks out on the water, because it was definitely, the conversation was different. We were like, yeah, it's polluted. Here are pollutants. This is how the science of it works. And they're like, ugh, science. And then it's like, all right, let's go kayaking. And they're like, oh, kayaking. Yeah, let's go. Let's do it. But being able to make the
Mhm.
connection between the science and the recreation was really helpful. So I did
Yeah.
that for a while. Really enjoyed it. I really enjoy high school students because they
Mhm.
are really in a place to be critical and ask critical questions. And I just love how vocal the students we were working with were. And they didn't hold back any punches. And there are moments where I'm like, whoa, you're
Mm.
asking really tough questions, and I don't actually have the answers for that. Or I agree, that's really terrible that these things happen. Like, what are we going to do about it? Or what would some solutions be? So really being positioned in a way to provide answers when possible, but also give them the space to find those answers themselves. And if they don't exist, think about what those next steps would be to get to a solution, and or to even think about a timeline for a solution, but really find the balance between hand holding and just letting them do what works best for them and doing the things that them being the local experts in their communities would have a better answer to than any other group of folks.
Yeah, and I think that's really powerful to take it out of the theoretical in class kind of thing, which is important, but to take it out of that and immerse the students in the actual environment of it by kayaking or whatever else you all did recreationally, because then they're having fun, but it's also sinking in and like popping questions up. I'm sure that's really cool. Yeah. High school students, they're not gonna they don't care about your feelings.
Oh, not at all, not at all. And at the time, I looked like a high school student, and so I feel like every
Mhm.
time I had to go into the schools, I would have so much trouble. They're like,
Yeah.
"Why are you coming back into the school? You shouldn't have left." I'm like, I'm grown." And it was like, "No, you're not. You think you're
Right.
grown. You're nothing but a kid." And it's like,
To carry your birth certificate around.
it's like, "Here's my driver's license." Like, "Oh, this is fake." I'm like,
Yeah, right.
"Oh my gosh!" And yeah, because I it's like early
Mhm.
20s, high school students are just like, "Oh, you're my age. I'm not
Yeah,
holding back
yeah,
any punches." It's like,
yeah.
wow, you all are cruel.
I
You're so
know.
cruel, and it's
Yeah,
fine. Like,
yeah,
luckily,
yeah.
at that point, I had tough skin, but I was like, wow, this what it's like to be in high school again? You all just don't care about you don't care about anybody. But I do love that they were funny and just like very caring. And I would say it was the high school boys that we worked with that really surprised me.
Mm,
And in the sense that they would have this like nonchalant attitude, like, yeah, I don't care about this. But they would be the ones like in other spaces that ask most questions, or they'll bring something up that we mentioned, like, you remember that? It's like, yeah, I was
yeah,
listening. I was like, oh, okay,
right.
yeah, yep, yep,
They will not show it on their face,
Oh
but it's
no,
happening.
no, like they won't show it at all. And then they're just like, yeah, because you remember this? And I was like, yeah, I remember that. And remember she said
Yep,
this though, and I was like,
yeah.
for me, it's just
Yep,
like, yay, it worked because I know I had
yeah,
feelings like leaving their classroom sometimes like, wow, that didn't work out well. I don't think that they were into it. And some days they weren't. And I think that that was good to take that and go back and tweak things. And other times, like, no, they were listening the entire time. And whenever they were ready, they made it known. And I appreciated that. But that
yeah.
was, yeah, it was a fun experience. Just to
Mhm,
watch some of the students we had been working with for a few years, like grow up, like get taller, or like their voice would change.
mhm,
Even their interest would shift. Like we had some students who were really into theater, and so that was great to be able to support them, go to their graduations. It was a joy. Like I enjoyed it. I would not be a teacher, educator in a formal sense at all, but it was great. It was great to be able to like
mhm.
hang out with them, and like sometimes we would have service projects on the weekends, and yeah, just like watch them lead a group or facilitate a round of introductions or a welcome, but just seeing them be in a space and feel comfortable and take charge and navigate very well. I loved it.
Yeah, that sounds like a great experience. It's fun to see the progress with I teach private music lessons and have taught in different worlds prior. So it's always really rewarding to see the progress and kind of be a part of that, even if it's a small part, large part, all of it. So I can
Hmm.
understand that. Yeah. Who we're kind of talking about being an influence on others, but who was a large influence in your life, either growing up or more recently?
I love that question, and that I don't have an answer. Or the answer I have is not, to me, doesn't really fit the mold of what others may say, but
Mhm.
I cannot name just one person who's been an influence on me, on my life, on the careers that I choose to pursue. I would say it's really been a culmination of a lot of individuals at different points in my life who have all been incredible and have contributed so much in their own way. Yeah, I was just to say, like growing up, it really changed, but it being my mother and my grandmother. And then as I was going through school, just having different educators who were just stellar. And then being a space of like, oh, we see you as a human being. We recognize that you're a brilliant little kid, and seeing that they really respected the other students and poured so much into each one of us. And I just respected that, because I think that teachers and educators get a terrible reputation of, and I get it. It's a very, like, to be an educator is challenging, and I understand it. But I would say there were so many along the way that were just like remarkable, and especially in, I think, middle and high school for me, when you're in a space where teachers can actually joke with you a little bit more. And I think that's became the space that I enjoy, where being able to joke or just be a support. And so individuals along that way. And yeah, I've just had a lot of really great folks serve as informal mentors. And even if it was just like, let's just have lunch, and we only had that one conversation, I'm very much in the headspace of like, there are learning opportunities around us all the time. And if we just wait for one person to be our guiding light, then we're going to miss out on just so much. There are lessons all around us in every season. And yeah, we never know. I never know. And I make it a point to just listen and heed warnings and advice. Granted, sometimes they're not what you need them to be, but really being a place to heed them, knowing that I can always learn something from it, tweak it to really fit what I may be navigating. But yeah, I'd love that there have been so many great influences, whether it be in careers, life, finances, just like emotional support. It's, man, if I had to pick, I couldn't even pick. I would have like a football team worth of influences.
Yeah, right.
And it's just like, depending on the quarter, we just kind of rotate in and out.
Yep. Yeah, that's completely understandable. It's a difficult question. I think I'm good at coming up with difficult questions. So
I appreciate it.
But that makes complete sense, because yeah, it does kind of shift and change as you grow and throughout the different chapters of somebody's life. So absolutely. I'm going to backtrack really quick.
Yeah.
Because I have a question that's just sticking in my brain from when you're talking about your experience in the archaeology. Wait, yeah, archaeology. Is that the right word?
Yeah. Yes.
So that's how little I know. The archaeology project that you're doing, and then you said that you decided that you wanted to go into the more of the public spaces and that kind of stuff. Was there a moment, or was it that happened, or was it more of a progression of, as you were doing that project and learning that path wasn't necessarily the path, but it's leading you to this other one?
Oh, I would say it was probably the latter, in that there were some experiences that really struck me. One in particular, thinking about some of the times we spent at, I believe we were at both the National Archives and the Library of Congress, but more so at National Archives, just looking at records that like white slave owners held. Like the level of documentation is shocking, especially when human bodies are a part of that role, or that inventory. And I think it was being able to see copies of said inventory, and just how those lists changed over time. And yeah, being in a space to like see these records, but not kind of know what happens after that. I think that stuck with me for a while, because it wasn't, all right, on line 7, there's Jane Doe, and then 10 years from now, you can see Jane Doe like life, and like, it is heartbreaking to know that for some people that is for like generations, that was their history. Like, that is where their name lives in perpetuity. And I'm very fortunate that some of those records exist, and I'm glad that there are historians and even community members who are dedicated to taking it from just that one name on that one line and one ledger, and bringing these folks, their stories and their lives into the real world, and bring it out into paper or sketches, or just like really honoring these folks. And I think it is vitally important to be in a place to remember and honor folks. And by virtue of that program, it made me, it brought to the forefront that every space that we're in, there's a history, there's a story, there's some underlining context that shapes that space and the people who use it and the people who don't use it. And I think it would behoove every single person in any space that we find ourselves in, whether it's an office building or a field, a play field, I don't know, park, even a cemetery. Like there's so much nuance that is not brought to the surface, and even the name of streets is shocking. So, like in New York, there, I can't believe I'm blanking on it, but Wall Street. Like
Mm-hmm.
that Wall Street was, and hopefully I'm remembering this correctly, but Wall Street was a divider because there was a Black community that lived on the other side of Wall Street because there was a wall. And
Mm-hmm.
there's no, I mean, there's the African, thankfully, there's the African burial grounds as a site that honors those Black folks who lived in that space. And but like everything is like down to like a street sign with a name on it, or a neighborhood, or a nickname for a community, or just anything. Like everything, there's so much context in every and anything around us. And sometimes it, like, if I think about it too much, I was like, I need to turn my brain off. But there's so much there's so much history in everything. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And I love that there are people who have their areas of focus and can really dial into, this is going to be my area of specialty, or this is what I'm really passionate about knowing and understanding. And or this is just something I don't know anything about in the moment, and I want to just learn a little bit more. But it really was that experience that made it very clear that like history is so powerful, and history told from all perspectives is even more powerful, and it shapes a space. And it just, ugh, literally can't say anymore. It is mind blowing, and it is always my hope that everyone finds a moment to be inquisitive, finds a moment to, even if it's standing on a street corner and like Googling the name of a street, or the name of a place, or name of a building, or like anything, just taking the time to do a little bit of research around a space to me is really grounding. It's grounding to understand, here are the people who were literally on this land before me. Here are the people who maybe lived here, maybe right before I bought a home, or
Mm-hmm.
just like really having a grounding in this space, because it is crazy just how people move. And like even in archaeology, like artifacts are literally the trash that people leave behind, and it's all of it tells a story. And I appreciate that there are opportunities and spaces for people to examine all of that and walk away to say, like, I may never come to this place again, but I know that these things happened. Here was the cause, here's the effect, and here's what happened going forward.
Oh, thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any organizations or artists or any causes or anything like that that you would like to highlight before we wrap up?
Yes, actually. So so very fortunate, but I am on the board for the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition,
Oh,
and
great.
I encourage everyone to check them out, because they're just doing some really great work to support love on the Duwamish River, because it is an incredible place. It's an incredible space. South Park is an incredible community, and like in many communities, community members just want to live and be happy and be healthy, and just have just a great space to live, work, play, visit. And I would say the organization is doing incredible work to really push for a lot of changes to improve the health of the Duwamish River. They are doing a lot to empower and really support our future leaders, our young folks, and they're just doing incredible work. And I'm very fortunate to be on the board. I'm very fortunate to just constantly be in a place of learning, especially as it relates to a lot of the policies and a lot of what they're wanting, not only as an organization, but an organization speaking on behalf of and with community members.
And the South Park Duwamish River is in the south part of Seattle, just for anybody that's listening that may not be familiar. Thanks for sharing that information about the organization. We'll post it in our show notes so folks can find it. Anything else that you think that we missed or that you wanted to mention before we're all done?
No, this was fun.
Good.
Yeah. It's interesting to be on the other side of a podcast because typically I'm a listener. I'm like, okay, yeah,
Yeah. Now you had to do all the talking.
No, I'm fine with it. I mean, I can be a talker when I'm ready to, but yeah, I enjoyed it, and I thank you for having me. This is cool.
Yeah, this was fantastic. Thanks for joining me, and I'm excited to be able to share this with folks, and I'm really happy to have been able to spend the last hour with you. So this is great. I appreciate it. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Sarneshea.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for Take Notice Amplifying Black Stories. Please subscribe and follow us on social media. We are at Take Notice Podcast. It would really help us out if you could take a couple of minutes to review our podcast. You can do so through your podcast app or by visiting our website. It's takenoticepodcast.org. Thank you for your support. Take Notice Amplifying Black Stories is produced, hosted, and edited by Allison Preisinger-Heggins with help from many. Music by Version Big 5 featuring Darius Heggins. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for taking notice.